Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Joe DiNunzio, and I am the Executive Director of the Mike and Renee Child Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And it's our great privilege to have Hardeep Gulati, the CEO of PowerSchool, here with us to give a talk. Hardeep is going to go into his background and talk about the company, so I'm not going to do too much of that. I'm going to say a couple things, though, that I think are important. The first is we're so grateful for Hardeep and for our Think.Do Discover speakers to come and engage with our community. It is a really important way, not just to give back, but to engage with us and to create a bridge between the academic community that many, if not most of us represent, and the business community. And Hardeep holds a special role as both town and gown, being the CEO of a company that employs 3,500 people and was the largest IPO in the history of our region, and also a member of the Chancellor May's academic advisory. And so that sort of connection between the business world and the academic world is really important. And of course, a foundation about what he's going to talk about, K-12 education. So please join me in giving, and I mean it this time, a very warm Aggie welcome to Hardeep Gulati.
Thanks, Joe. It's such a privilege to be here. Joe and I have been talking for almost now a couple of years, and about the Big Bang, which we're really glad that we're actually now part of that and sponsoring some of the education awards. The whole institute, just the work you guys are doing here is phenomenal, and good to see that we have actually got a couple of students here to really take advantage of these sessions as well. Well, I feel like I'm speaking with the audience where I have chairman of the California School Board, dean, multiple deans. So I feel like I'm really out of place to be talking about transforming education when I have such esteemed people in the audience. So I'll try to give my perspective more from a technologist, more from representing the 3,500 passionate PowerSchool employees. Some of them also are here, as well as the perspective of some of our customers, like Modesto, like UC Davis Unified, who are actually also in the audience. So it'll be very interesting conversations, and hopefully, if I can answer, they definitely can. So I'll be really happy to bring them in. All right, so let's start with first talking about the topic itself. So when we talked about it, we could have talked a lot of different things. One of the things that I think it's top of the mind for everybody, I think there's, if you pick up a newspaper, you pick up a magazine, you put a TV on, I think every day education right now is being talked about. And interestingly, that's just not in North America, it's actually globally. I think in the last couple of years, after COVID, everybody has realized that how much education is important and how much some of the things are broken. And we have just seen a seminal moment in education in terms of awareness of the problem and also what needs to be done. Now, there's a lot of different perspective of what needs to be done, some very political, some more, I think, having good bipartisan support. But I think it's important to reflect broadly, but then also take, from a lens of a company which is building education software and serving almost 80% of the North American schools as to what we are seeing. So hopefully you'll find it engaging, and of course, we'd love to have more Q&A discussion about that. So Joe asked me to give my background because part of this entrepreneurs is that we want to see more of me over here. And I wish there was a formula to be here. I think it's sometimes being at the right place at the right time, taking opportunities like this where you get to hear and see as to what things lead to people to be there. And I think, I've been really fortunate to be part of the UC Davis community with Dean Lindstrom in the School of Education from last almost 4 years being part of the board. And then Chancellor May invited me to be part of the advisory board, and I've been fortunate to be able to see the full UC Davis investments and growth as well. In fact, I was with the call earlier with the Chancellor May, talking to one of the influential person to look at how we can improve some of the investments in the UC Davis area around the food innovation and security. So a lot of great work is just happening in UC Davis. So I'm so glad that I'm getting a chance to be interacting and be able to contribute back to the community. Now, I've been with PowerSchool for almost now 8 years. I'll give a history of PowerSchool, but I think I've never been more passionate about anything I've done in my life than PowerSchool, and you will see why. That it's an area where I had tremendous opportunity to make impact, and there's so much more to be done that every day I can get up and I can still have my 20 things I can do. So it's just education and education technology is an area which has been underserved, and we are just fortunate to be part of the solution and what we can do there. Now, a little bit of my background as well. I've been in enterprise software for 25 years. You will see some names where I was part of Oracle for a decade, working on a lot of different industry areas. So I've been fortunate to be part of Oracle retail solutions, life sciences solutions, high-tech solutions. So one of the things you will see I'll talk about is that a lot of my learnings come from how other industries, I've not grown in the education field, but I have been part of technology solutions for a lot of different industries and figuring out what are the commonalities that we can bring to the education sector. And that really, I find myself fortunate that the last almost a decade I've spent in education, first in corporate education with SumTotal, which is the #1 learning management solution. I think I was sharing that if you guys have to touch any UC labs, you have to go through a certification, as well as the on any certification. That actually, if you see the URL, it's probably SumTotal. We were the #1 corporate compliance and learning platform, which is part of Skillsoft now, and I got a chance to then move into the PowerSchool after that. But my entire background, even my education, computer science, bachelor's, master's, and MBA at Wharton, what I find myself fortunate is that every one of these steps I took somehow led me to the other in terms of just following the track. Trying being from the technology side into product designs, into helping vertical solutions, and then into education, realizing that actually education is the center point. If we can improve education, everything else actually gets easier. So that's why you see me a lot passionate about PowerSchool and what I've got to do now. Part of my passion actually comes from raising 3 kids as well. My own, my father was the first generation college person, and he told the value in was that education is the most important thing you can do. When I wanted to go party after undergrad, he said, no way, you're first doing postgraduate and MBA before you think about any party. I think served me the tremendous. So I try to create that same level of focus for my kids on education, which is, to me, is the foundation for everything, what I've been able to achieve. Let's talk about the PowerSchool story. That's enough of my story. When we look at PowerSchool, and as I said, I came from other industries, technology background, corporate education. First thing, 2015, when I joined PowerSchool, I sat down with a lot of customers and asked them, what is the biggest challenge in education? What are you worried about the most from a technology perspective? And the #1 thing everybody said was, it's very siloed. I have many systems. I don't know what talks to what. I don't have any data. I can't really know where things are connected. So we started our mission and vision was around how do we unify the technology infrastructure to be able to serve every child better. So that's the mission we started with. Now, we were fortunate that I got a chance. I didn't start PowerSchool. Actually, PowerSchool was started not too far here in Folsom in 1997. Apple actually acquired the company in 2000. Steve Jobs would actually come to our Folsom office back in those days, and every month would come in and review every designs. In fact, if you look at our products 20 years back, they would look exactly like iTunes. We had entire layouts were like that. I think when Apple focused into more on the consumer, they hit the jackpot. They realized that software and education was a lot more complex for them to be focused on. So they actually sold PowerSchool to Pearson. Pearson being the #1 education company, Carrie was almost there for 20 years, really invested in the product. We made it almost the #1 student system, the core heartbeat of any K-12. This is where how you run a school. Your attendance, your grades, your report cards, all the funding to the state and federal happens through SIS. And they made us into a #1 SIS platform across North America with huge amount of investments. But then they hit a roadblock that they, being a content company, they didn't know how to take the technology platform and make it broader. So they started focusing back on their core competency of building content. And they tried to sell PowerSchool. That's why when I came in, and Vista Private Equity, which is one of the leading enterprise software private equity, where I had worked, my previous company was also funded by that, came in and said that, would you, in your next gig, do you want to run this company? And I got really immediately excited about the potential. I was telling Jeff on my way here is that my other choice was doing pricing for a pharmaceutical company and as a public company. I'm like, no. This is really the place to be where you can make an impact. And what was fortunate is that when I started my journey with Vista, and Robert Smith, actually, who's the founder of Vista, he's the son of 2 principals of Denver Public School. And he's equally passionate. He's actually, I think his famous viral video is when he gave student loans free for all their students in one of the convocations at the HBCU. And, he's really looking at how we can make an impact on education globally. So I shared my vision with him, and he asked me, so how much money do you need? I said, okay, I was not expecting that right there, but so I threw a number, I need $500 million, and then I can be good. So he said, well, you got double of that. Well, we actually so far have invested $2 billion. So we brought in Onyx as well to help make this company from a product into a platform. And some of the names you're probably familiar if you're in K-12, Schoology, Naviance. Some of you are young enough, you might have gone through Naviance to apply for college. 40% of the high school students in US use Naviance to apply for colleges. We pretty much bought the leading K-12 solutions in the market and brought them into a one PowerSchool family. The beauty of that was the reason we went through the acquisition strategy versus trying to build organically, it would have taken us almost 20, 30 years to go build this platform on all that IP. And with this strategy, we're able to really, in the last 7 years, grow 7 times. We were 100 million when we started in 2015. We just gave the guidance to be a little shy of 700 million for this year. And part of that growth came from acquisition, but a big part of that growth came from this flywheel effect that everybody wanted these integrated solutions going back to that unified platform. And now we are kind of an end-to-end K-12 platform, which we have not done. We went, we wanted to continue this path and make this to a global platform, so we recently went public, as Joe mentioned. That was, very exciting. We were the largest IPO in the region, I think at least in the decade or 2 decades. Now, I call the IPO as a wedding. It's a lot of work before you get to the wedding. The wedding itself is a lot of fun, but the real work starts in the marriage after the IPO. So it has been a very interesting IPO ride, especially now that markets have been, very, ups and downs. You guys all see the stock market, and happy to talk a whole separate conversation of what it meant to be. But what's great is now we're getting the recognition of really what we're trying to do in education, which is very unique. Nobody else there is no public company or even private company of our scale who is trying to do this, what we're doing in K-12, globally. And which has allowed us to serve now 50 million students, 80% of the North American school districts, many international. Entire country of Uruguay uses our system And during the pandemic, we're able to keep their schools and learning going thanks to our system. What exciting is the impact we are having with districts across North America. We have 30 state and province level contracts. Very excited to just bring Puerto Rico, who's just recently selected. If you're familiar with Puerto Rico, how many hurricanes and the disruption in the schools and everything, it's a big, they have a huge learning loss happening because of the disruption. So having these systems which allow to have continuity of learning is a big part of the investment and focus. So we're able to really make an impact across North America as well in not just in UED, but also 75% of the school districts in Canada. 90 of the top 100 school districts, but also almost 15,000 districts across private schools, charter schools. So the impact we are able to make on all the different components, whether you are looking at the back office running their school operations, whether you're looking at their classroom systems, learning online, doing assessments, managing special needs kids, managing behavior, being able to not just manage the operation in the classroom, but actually support the teachers who are on the front line of everything what the schools are about. Helping not only recruit and train and retain teachers, managing substitute teachers, but actually being able to help empower them with solutions that helps them create a better environment for them to be able to do what they really are trying to do, which is try to teach. And there's no other company which has brought all these different pieces K-12 schools need to put under one. Russ, who's CIO at Modesto, will attest to that. They have almost 13 of our solutions. And prior to this, prior to PowerSchool, they would have to go to 19, 20 different vendors to procure each solutions. And every school district in North America has to reinvent the wheel, integrate those systems to make sense of where the students are and how you can improve the education outcomes. I think some of you will see, as a parent and student, you will start relating to that as well. Now, when you look at all the stuff I think everybody is focused on right now, whether that's climate change, food security, real big problems. I think a lot of times we're not putting education and the learning crisis at the same level. Now, it might sound self-serving for me to say that, but I think if you start doing a research, and I was talking to Dean earlier about if you really do the research and look at the impact of education to the society and all the different, you can actually correlate a lot of the problems we face to the fact that we have huge learning crises, not just in North America, but globally. Now, let's talk about it, because you all know, some of you don't live into this world, so let's talk about why there is education challenges. It seems simple enough. Well, the problem is multifaceted, because you're going to hear a lot of noise all over the place. So there's a supply problem. We have less teachers. There is engagement problem. There is education outcome problems. There's problems around what actual learning is happening, how many kids are actually at different competency levels. I think that some of the numbers we don't fully appreciate. Only 65% of our K-12 students actually go to a college degree. 20% go into different jobs or two-year degrees. Around 15 to 20%, we lose those kids. We don't know where they go. They're not going to job, they're not going into college. 20% of our kids, that's millions of kids, we are losing. The problem is even worse. When you look at the college, now UC Davis is a very, strong institution, so your numbers probably are not that bad, but when you look at a lot of the higher education institutes, 50% of the students are not graduating. And a lot of the problems actually start in K-12 because they're never college level ready. They don't have a clarity on what major they're trying to do, and that they pick up majors when they're not fully engaged or interested, and then they try to move around, and then they lose interest. So when you look at the numbers, these are very staggering numbers of how much education we are, even with the most developed country in the world, we still have those challenges. And you take that now globally, the problem just really is a huge magnitude, but doesn't get talked enough about the impact. 6 million teachers are needed to reach. And just in US, we have a 350,000 teacher gap as we speak. Dean knows this problem very, very much, that the number of teachers who are leaving now each year, all School of Educations and all the degrees, we're not entering that many teachers. So not only the gap is there, the gap is widening because of our new teachers entering the profession versus how many teachers are leaving. It's a huge gap. And that, again, globally, that gap is even further. Whether you go to Middle East, you go to even developing countries, they have a similar challenges. Now, one of the reasons, the number one reason is compensation, where teachers leave. But if you start looking at the reasons why teachers are leaving, their empowerment, their being able to have the right tools, the right infrastructure to support them, and their well-being are the number 2 reason of why they're leaving. 40% of the teacher's time is going outside actually teaching, having to deal with all the administrative aspects. 80% of our $700 billion we spend in K-12 goes through teachers and staff salaries, and 40% of that time goes into administrative stuff. That's a huge waste of money and time. Now, when you look at COVID, I think, as I said, COVID just made the problem even bigger. But I had a state superintendent who talked about that even prior to pandemic, 25% of the state kids did not have the grade level reading and math skills. That further got another 20 to 25%, so almost 40 to 50% in some states where they're not meeting the grade level math and reading. But to begin with, we had a problem, and COVID made it all worse. You take that, we only had shut down for a couple of months, and we were quick to respond with online and hybrid learning in US. But if you look at international, again, I won't name a country, but McKinsey did, actually, if you go look at a MENA report from McKinsey about education impact, one country had an 11-month loss of learning during pandemic. So we left one whole year for some of the kids in terms of the learning loss. But worse is, a lot of times, and this happened a lot in the US as well, the teachers still had to pass the kids to the next level so they can still retain them. So now their whole concepts are gap, and now we are trying to go back and teach them the last year grade to see where the gaps are. And their kids are having a hard time trying to catch up from last year and the new school, new grade. And that's further creating challenges for them. Well, I think you were probably in pandemic, you saw a lot of passionate parents. In fact, I think some of the school board meetings are becoming like Jerry Springer shows, like they're getting very passionate. There's a lot of talk about parents who want to be involved with the education, but only 13% of the kids actually, 13% of the parents who actually feel that they're fully involved. I'm going to shame my kid and sitting in the back, but he, I got a notice today, the report card, that he fell behind on his assignment. And right there, Mom and I had to talk about how some things have to change before he needs to do other things before he goes to the fun activity. So having parents having those tools, being able to have that real-time interaction before it's too late, parents are hungry for that. They're there to support it, but we got to figure out how we really get them involved. When you look at from all the different aspects, not only we need the tools from exploration post-COVID, we need to really look this opportunity not to just recover, but actually fundamentally change how we're improving the education ecosystem. All this K-12 impact, as I said, trickles into the higher education. You guys use Banner today in the higher education. That's a sister company of ours, actually invested by Vista. We were talking about student success model Davis uses from Education Advisory Board, which is also a sister company of ours. We actually, three of us are partnering to look at how we can look at student success across all the way into the workforce for skill level as well. And when you look at the skill gap, they're staggering. I think people don't fully appreciate there's almost 20 million software job gaps globally on which exist. So huge amount of skill gap which is going missing. It's just, we think that, we don't have enough jobs, but we actually don't have enough skills to meet to the needs of the job. So what does this all mean? Well, why are people not focusing on this? Well, the education industry is a $10 trillion market. It's actually third biggest market, across the globe in terms of the spend. K-12 is actually almost 7 trillion of that. So US is actually one of the biggest markets in that of almost 700 billion, reaching almost 900 billion by 2030. But global market, that's almost 7 times that just in K-12. So there's a lot of money being spent. Now, I think we all would probably agree that we can probably spend more on education than a lot of other things. But how do we, that's something which I probably won't be able to address. Some of you may be able to go into the politics and help us get more funding. But what do we need to do with the funding we have, and how do we really change that? What needs to be done? Well, let's start with one of the key things when you look at a school, a picture which is from 100 years back to a school picture which is now, looks very similar. So majority of our schools haven't really changed. The entire learning aspect hasn't really changed. We are seeing more devices in the classroom. I think thanks to the ESSER stimulus money, we almost increased our device availability from 60% to 80% in North America. So in US, this was a huge movement because used to be only we would move like 1 or 2% each year. Just through thanks to the ESSER funding, we've now increased that device availability to 80%. Access still remains a problem. A lot of the schools which are not, even in urban areas, but definitely in the rural areas. So we still have a lot of access issue too. But when you look at, even while we have devices, that doesn't change. The learning is still happening quite a lot. If you have kids or nieces, nephews, you still do the same way, take your homework in the paper, fill it up, teacher grades that, you get your report card in the home. There's a lot of that, how the schools are being run, the classroom is run, it still hasn't changed. Now, if you look at all the things which are talked about, actually ask ChatGPT to generate that for me. Tell me all the topics on education which are being talked about across all North America. I think there's a lot of talk, funding, education is definitely a huge topic, which is good. Equity, teacher shortage, teacher pay, choice, curriculum standardization, tons of stuff. Like half of these are political, half of them, actually there's a good bipartisan support. So problem is everybody has a different perspective of how we really try to solve education. Let's turn to the management consultants, McKinsey. They put a very nice framework on all of that and provide their own learnings from all the different things and really talk about how schools should go approach it. We were talking to this team earlier this week. We're presenting together at the ASU GSV next week about how to use ESSER money to help with that, what's working, the data, the high quality teachers are still very important, the core skills and instruction is very important, but let's also augment that with better school structures, better teacher preparation. We're talking about how much PD is important. That's number one investment that has a huge ROI. But then also, not just technology access, but use it to change learning from a grades. The letter grade is actually one of the worst things we do because it doesn't tell you what the kid learned. What we need is a proficiency, the competency, the mastery, the skill. A lot of time when the parents get a letter grade or the teacher sees A or B, doesn't tell what kid is learned or what not. How do we move that into skill, the proficiency, and be able to really track that into what skills they're going to need for what their ambition is? So a lot of good frameworks, a lot of good thoughts, and I think good to see the amount of investment that's happening. I take my hat on this and look at the parallel for what have I seen in other industries work, and why can't we bring the learnings? Why do we have to reinvent the wheel? Let's try to bring the learnings from the other industries. Well, whether it's healthcare, retail, right, technology, supply chain. If you look at what are some of the things that has really worked, digital transformation. Every one of the industries I touched upon have gone huge investment to try to automate, move away from paper into digital world. In fact, if you look at it, on average, industries spend 9% of their budgets on information technology. Compare that to K-12 education, that's less than 2%. 50% of the K-12 processes are still based on paper. I think we had to fill my kid's emergency card for the school district at least 10 times. They lose it every time. And every year we have to fill that again. The other big factor is data. There's no other industry, no retailer, no manufacturer, no healthcare, which can actually, in today's day and age, run without analytics. Can you imagine any big, without having that visibility of your supply chain and predictions and all that stuff? Can you imagine healthcare? We were talking to the dean about how even prediction of where the disease is, how do you resource it? Retail, I think amount of data they collect on you and serve you all those things. Without data, there's no other industry which works in today's day and age. Personalization. This is where most of the other industries are putting investment. Retail, I think how we shop personalized, right? Every bit of what you're on the website, you would probably see what you should be buying. They know more than you what you should be buying. Even on healthcare, that's the biggest future area for healthcare is how do we personalize medicine, personalize care. Well, let's look at all these things and what does it mean K-12? Can we apply the same things which have transformed all these other industries into K-12? Let's start with the whole area around, let's paint that picture. With these three big initiatives, what if we have an opportunity where a teacher, student, and parent can actually have one place where they can see everything about their kid, and whether it's their grades, their report card, their attendance, their special needs, their college plans, their career plans, everything in one place. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that make it easier? Now let's see if all that data, the district leaders like Matt can have that and have the full advantage to be able to make real-time decisions on where the instructions and where the changes need to happen. 90% of the districts say that they don't have access to real-time data. We call education almost like a backward view mirror, because when you grade a kid and you analyze how the kid did on the summative test to really know where your kids are, that year is already lost. You can't go back and reteach some of that because you have to still deal with the lesson plan to finish the curriculum. So all the grading and summative tests tell you how did the kid do, and you have hardly an opportunity to go address that. Now, you try to use that to influence the next year education. Well, but not every child is the same. Situations change. COVID has taught us, like, there's been almost every 3 months, 6 months, there's a different crisis. You're starting again, and you again back to the backward view mirror. So there's no real-time way to really make that impact. So what if we can make that real time? What if we can really personalize to every child's need? So let's paint that picture. If we can have a complete digitization of all the processes in K through 12, all the way from enrollment to, all the different things that interact in a school, and it's, you eliminate the papers. We have a school district, and actually Los Altos, which uses the math teacher, doesn't use paper at all. It actually uses a system all the way from the teacher does the instructions online through the tools. The homework gets assigned automatically. The kids take those assessment online. It automatically gets grades. They come in, then the next day they actually see how the kid is actually done, what are the areas of gaps, and now they're able to provide the intervention for that child as to what they need. The challenge, as I mentioned, is on average, a teacher is touching 19 different systems in a week. Going back to the problem of 40% of the time of teachers going in administrative, it's because they're touching 19 different systems in a week. Now, a lot of companies are trying to solve this. What we're trying to do is bring everything in one unified portal by acquiring all these different things, not just a portal, but actually one system which can bring all that information. And look at it, it's not just about grades and everything. We want to know where that kid, a parent, a child, the teacher should be able to know where that kid is in their college path, in their career path. By bringing Naviance and Schoology and your SIS, your special ed, all that thing in one system, think about the power that you're able to now have one view where the child is going. Let's take that the next step. Okay, what do we do with the analytics? Can we actually have the analytics to really drive all that? Well, Alabama just actually implemented our analytics across the entire state. We have about 10 states who are trying to do this, including even LA. What they've done is implemented one way to look at the whole child. Your attendance, your social emotional status, your summative tests, your grades from the classroom, all your interactions in the school, having one place to be able to feed that and having a view how the child is doing. Wouldn't that be powerful to be able to now equip the principal, to be able to the teacher, to be able to know where their kids are and what all is happening? Why we're stopping just at what's happening in the school? What we're trying to do is, as I mentioned, with Illusion, which is your banner platform, with EAB, with workforce data, can we actually give that view to the district leaders, to the county leaders, to the governors, of giving them dashboards which can tell them where their future workforce is going to be and where do they need the investment to bring where the job gaps are, where can they attract more businesses. It changes the entire way of us flying blind and hoping that everything is working to actually having a real-time view to be able to start managing our communities and be able to really start investing where the problem is. But this is great, but let's take that one level further. Let's talk about personalization. Think about today, every kid gets the same homework. Doesn't matter how much good they are in that particular concept, they will, there's some value to repetitiveness. I perfectly give that. But if the kid is lagging beyond certain levels, they typically still, there's no direct thing addressing their gap. One teacher is covering 25 to 30 kids. If you're in a public school, and my kid in a school here in Sacramento, where a teacher covers 5 sections with 25 kids in each. So the science teacher literally had 150 kids she was managing. So when I offered to speak with her on career pathways in tech, I didn't realize I was signing up for 6 sections back to back, and I realized how difficult her job was to speak in 6 different sections in a day and having to address 150 kids and managing all that. And then you have helicopter parents sending messages and all that stuff. There is no time for personalization. But if ChatGPT can learn so much about you, or why can't we bring that to education? I know we are all afraid about that. It's going to have a big negative impact. A lot of schools have banned ChatGPT, and we absolutely don't want kids to start cheating. But can we actually help it to augment the teacher and help support the instruction? Can we create a personalization where every kid is getting a personalized homework? So no longer we need to give homework. Imagine how much time saving for the teacher. But then we understand where the child concept is, what level they are. Let's give them the next point, and being able to then help them navigate with an adaptive, personalized homework to make sure that 30 minutes, 1 hour they're going to spend on homework will be the most productive to help them address the gap they need. And then also maybe the kids who are already excelling, let's excel them even further. And let's challenge them even further so that they can continue to perform even better. Again, these technologies exist. The AI is mature enough to be able to leverage that, and we got to start adopting it. Because one thing we can all agree on, that doesn't matter which side of the debate you are at what needs to be done in education, I think we do all agree that if every child gets that support, we are all going to win. Because imagine a society where we are able to save that 20% kids, we are able to save 500,000 kids from dropout, we are able to graduate more kids, we are able to give them better career path. The economic benefit, the societal benefit is just tremendous. So we're trying to be part of the solution. Hopefully this talk helps you maybe get more excited about edtech, maybe join PowerSchool, maybe start a company, or maybe become our champions in the school districts and help us really transform education. So I appreciate the time, and thank you again, and I'm happy to take more questions. Should I move to? Yes. Yes, we can get closer.
So before we start, just as a reminder, you were all given a flyer at the beginning with a QR code. Please feel free to scan that with your question. Vincent is helping us curate that. Hardeep has been very generous with his time. I think we'll have time to get to many, if not most of them. Really appreciate that. I do have to say before you start, where's your son?
All the way in the back. He's a good kid. I should not have.
I'm just saying, I thought my teenagers, I have 2 sophomores, had it bad having 2 faculty members as parents. Holy Hannah, dude. Good on you. Wow. Fantastic. So we've got a lot of questions, but I think I want to start with, we are a business school after all, and my dean would probably put me under heat if I didn't ask the question. So you have a challenge as the CEO of a publicly traded company. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders and obviously employees and others to build a profitable, successful company. You have investors, all that. And then yet, you serve public institutions, right? In particular, perhaps the most important public institution in every country, right? TK to 12 education. As CEO and someone who's clearly passionate about education, but also passionate about building a successful, profitable company, how do you balance those two things?
No, it's a great question, and to be honest with you, I think every one of us initially, as we were growing our company, were struggling with that, hey, should we be a for-profit company, given that what mission we have is great to be able to, make that more democratic and make it easier. How do we, I think we all agree that teachers should get paid more, so how do you justify the budget you're spending on technology? Should we be giving this free? And a lot of education companies have been nonprofit. A lot of education companies have been started by educators who have tried to build that and be able to really give that back to the community. But the struggle, the reason we are here, is that if you think there is no large enterprise software technology company who have tried to solve this problem. It's a big problem, huge amount of money. Why has that shied away from other tech companies to invest with such a huge return? And part of the challenge is that it's a very fragmented problem as well. Every state has their own regulations. Every state wants education policies and process to be different. Every district's of different size, charter schools, private schools, they all have different. You take that global, that problem is even worse. So kind of investment required. This problem requires a scaled investment. And we have seen nonprofit companies have difficult time getting that scale. So we made that deliberate decision that we want to be a for-profit. We want to build a good business to do good. And if the ability for us to get $2 billion of investment, be able to raise more money in the public markets, being able to take this globally requires us to show that we're running a good business. Now, we try to invest almost every dollar we make back into the business, whether it's in the product. In fact, if you look at it, we spend between our R&D costs and capitalized R&D almost more than 20%, which is higher than even Google spends or a lot of other companies spend on their R&D, because going back, the problem is big. We want to solve that. But yet, we're running still a good, profitable shop, which allows us to still continue to invest in our people and continue to invest in doing more M&A that allows us to even invest international and go global. So I think there's a conflict, but I think if you go back to the problem, that this problem requires scale. This problem requires a huge amount of investment. If we don't run a good business and it's not good for our shareholders or for our investors, then we won't be able to invest in all the technology and the investments to really provide the solution this market needs. So we were definitely struggling with it, but we feel that we are definitely in the right place and able to give back to the community as well through that.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that response. So I have one more question, then we're going to turn it over to your questions. Well, I have a lot more than one, but I will attempt to show impulse control. So I share your passion for TK to 12 education being transformative, that it can and should be the thing that creates equity for everybody in our country and around the world. And yet, let's focus on California for a moment. We're entering the 10th year of the LCFF funding formula, whose intent was really to drive equity in education in the state. And if you look at outcomes for those students that are furthest from opportunity, it sure doesn't feel like we've made very much progress. And very much appreciate what kind of you've laid out in your vision. But 10 years and a lot of funding, and it doesn't seem as a state that we've really figured out how to make progress here. Do you have thoughts about that and what role PowerSchool and the many relationships you have could have a positive impact?
No, it's a great discussion. In fact, we were just having the discussion with Jeff Bezos, who was a superintendent at Newhall, which Jeff was showing me his scorecard of Newhall was one of the top performing school districts in California. And Jeff has recently joined us as our education impact consultant to help us provide that, what are the learnings and how do we kind of replicate that across other school districts. And we were also sharing, there's not a lack of fund. In fact, Superintendent Thurman just, signed up another $4 billion, which we'll be giving to the districts to help with that. I think one of the things I firmly believe that we cannot throw more bodies at the problem. I think we are throwing bodies and dollars without optimizing how that investment is being really be effective. And this is where technology has shown us that technology is one of the biggest value creation, ROI, across any industries. If you look at even other industries, putting a factory, hiring a job per person, the ROI on technology in any other industry is almost 300%. We've seen that even in K-12 even higher. Because spending a couple of dollars per student to buy a product actually has an ROI, and sometimes that pays within a year. So how do we, not look at this as a purely of a problem of funding, but actually use technology to help scale and really address this? And we believe that, everything else has a role. We need more teachers, we need better curriculum, we need better, interventions and counseling and support for kids. But without a technology platform, we are throwing more bodies at the problem and not getting the full ROI and return on it. So if you do it together, then we can really get the results. And if you look at the ESSER, one of the call-outs of ESSER, 20% of the ESSER money needs to show how the interventions actually are progressing based on what investments made. So most of the districts are struggling to not just put those interventions, but actually have to prove that those interventions were the right investment areas. So that's where we're seeing a lot of demand for our analytics stuff to help districts. I had a superintendent of one of the top 5 school districts in the US who talked about they signed millions of dollars of contract for tutoring after COVID to help kids provide the support. The usage was less than 10% of that in their school district. And the 10% of the kids who used it actually didn't need it. So how do we really make sure that the investments are going at the right areas and be able to help them provide the surgical intervention that every child needs?
Great, thank you for that, Hardeep. So I'm going to turn to your questions now. So we got one, I'm creating an amalgam of them and putting a little of my spin in it. Apologies for that. Appreciate your conversation very much about individualized and personalized attention for our students in education. And that's been, I think, a dream of many educators for many, many years. And I think you presented a powerful thesis that technology used appropriately can be a real help to getting that. But part of the challenge is mindset, right? As we move to MTSS, the multiple tier systems of support and UDL, those approaches in teaching are very powerful, but only if our teachers have the time and energy and tools to get the professional development and shift mindset. And it's not just teachers, it's administrators, it's school districts. So as a technology provider, as a vendor, as a platform, do you have the ability to grapple with that mindset issue? And the students that are in our programs know very much about how we spend a lot of our effort talking about a growth mindset. We need a growth mindset here, right? And again, not trying to be critical of any of those individuals, it's just the reality of that shift is hard. We've all wanted it forever. The vision you present is, as a parent, that's incredibly compelling, and yet we're struggling with it.
Yeah. So I think, again, drawing from other industries, I kind of, when we talk about personalized learning, even with my team and with my customers, I kind of give them a parallel to my Tesla. Well, the first one of the features Tesla added was that automatic, based on GPS, adjusting your suspension. So every time in my home, when I was enter the ramp, I would scrap the bottom. Mm-hmm. But Tesla has a beautiful features. Once you actually raise the bar, the next time you go there on that GPS location, it will automatically raise it. Mm-hmm. Right? So a small feature of intelligence that augments the driver. They're starting from that, and then to be able to keep them in lane, mm-hmm. keep the speed cruise, then let's navigate automatically, then let's start look at auto navigation, and then let's go to the full driving. So personalized learning and education needs to start with that same construct. Is like, let's start giving those tools. So some of the things we are doing with the teachers is, ability to recommend that this child needs this help or they need this intervention. And without having teachers to think about what content or whatever I need to be able to do there, we can recommend that so they don't have to go search and they already don't have enough time in the day. We can automatically take the recommendations, but they can still assign it and they're still blessing it. We can then go to a full automated personalized learning and stuff. So we need to do this in stages. And what we're seeing is whether it's predictive at risk or recommendations, those are already, we have a lot of school districts like Kern County, for example. They are bringing data from 57 districts in the county, and the county superintendent has a data pledge with all their superintendents, and they're doing predictive analytics to tell which kids are going to be at risk in future and how they can help the districts to put the right strategy. So AI is being used today in that individual steps that will help. The beauty is what every educator I've talked to, when we talk about the nirvana, I think there's a general recognition that we need that. Same thing like driving. We all want automatic full driving,
Sure.
but we all have stages to get there, and we are working with the industry to help get there.
Great, thank you for that answer. I will say, just as a caveat, looking at Professor Hargadan, I know he's channeling to me, please, for the love of Mike, don't let Elon anywhere near our TK-12 education system. We've heard you, Professor Hargadan, you didn't even need to speak it. So another question from our audience, which is, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs in innovators looking to make an impact in the educational technology industry? What qualities do you think are essential for success? We have a lot of students, a lot of grad students, others thinking about pursuing this, as their mission, as their vision quest.
See, one of the things I've always struggled is that we have so much amount of innovation actually does happen in K-12. There's a fair bit of entrepreneurs who have come from education side, trying to build technology. They're technology guys who come in and try to understand. And one of the things I think education guys struggle in building scalable technology. Technology guys struggle in understanding what works. Jeff was making a comment, when you look at almost half of our team is actually coming from technology background and half coming from education background. So we know this problem hasn't been solved in education before, but it's been solved in other industries. But we also know that we can't solve this as technologists. We need to really understand what the educators day in and day out looks like. So marrying that two skills is very important for any startup. I think people struggle with that. Second, going back to my MBA days, one of the biggest lessons I got was how do you cross the chasm and get the tornado effect, right? How do you really build that? Well, in education, it's one of the big struggle is that you have to cross the chasm in every state. So, and you don't have enough tornado effect to really build that scale in that state, and now you're back to that bowling pin again. You have to go knock down the customer in the state because even every county starts to think about what my other counties are doing. I don't care what you're doing in that state. So that is one of the biggest challenges in education, and that's why you don't see a lot of edtech companies public. You have not seen edtech companies which have scaled up because a lot of the companies struggle to get that scale. They get their Series B, Series C, and then they hit that scale problem of getting the tornado effect. And what I always recommend for the education companies is to think about the technology they're building, how that's going to scale up to multi-state solutions. We were fortunate. The reason PowerSchool is in this space is because we were fortunate from the investment Steve Jobs did during Apple days to Pearson to invest ahead of the market and give us that multi-state perspective to be able to think about this globally. Entrepreneurs need to think about that to be able to really scale their education technology.
Well, it's an interesting segue into another question, and so sort of as a preface. So there's more than 1,000 local education agencies in California alone, tens of thousands across the U.S. And as you mentioned, local in our education in our country tends to be very local. There's even some controversy of having a federal Department of Education, right? And yet this question is like, why are countries like Singapore and Finland and others seeming to adapt to new paradigms, embracing technology more effectively, and ultimately, at least in a parent standpoint, being more effective in consistently educating their students? Are we doomed to this sort of balkanized approach, or are there ways that technology can help bring us together?
No, I think you're absolutely right. When you look at the just STEM achievements in some of the countries you mentioned, whether it's Singapore, South Korea, Finland, US stands actually in terms of science and maths actually below 15 or 20 the last time I checked. I think that's the lowest we are in any list of stuff where the top ranks are typically these countries. But let's also put in the perspective their scale. They have Singapore has less than 1 million kids, so they can think at that level. We have 55 million kids in K-12 in North America. There's only 7 million kids in entire Saudi Arabia. We have more kids in California, almost at 6 million. So we have a much bigger scale problem, and it does require some level of localization to be able to address the needs of that community. But at the same time, I think, again, I do put the perspective, half the things, while are very bipartisan and very local, are very partisan, but there are half the solutions we're talking about. We generally have good bipartisan support. We have, states like Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, different sides of the spectrum still using these platforms and statewide. So the problem, is definitely still solvable because generally there's a good alignment in the Department of Education, in federal, around what needs to be done.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions, and we still have time for a few more, so if you haven't gotten your question, please share it. So a little bit about you for a moment. So when you came to PowerSchool, you'd had a successful career as my words, not yours, technologist, right? Very strong engineering background. You went to Wharton, which we try not to hold against you. And you had to have very different challenges, and to a certain extent, certainly when it comes to education technology, you were a bit of an outsider. So the question is, how did you find your way? How did you build your internal network? How were you able to get the organization moving in the direction that you wanted it to?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the things I think, education actually transcend borders and boundaries, right? If you think about, I've studied my elementary school in Delhi, middle school in Agra in northern India, my high school in east of India in Assam, Guwahati, my undergrad in the middle of the Nagpur, my master's in Mumbai, Philadelphia and San Francisco from a Warren. And if you look at, if I can do the job, any kid sitting anywhere in the world, I think can still have the same education background. I've gone to local private schools, I've gone to government schools. I think when you look at the education, where we're teaching it's actually, there's a lot of equalizer across the globe. Now, I think I owe it to the right teachers who invested in me at that point. I was sharing with Dean Rao about, in IIT, my master's professor was somebody who founded main memory databases in Lucent Bell Labs and decided to go back and not make the $1 billion Snowflake or HANA, but actually go back and teach. And I got to be a student and got to learn, something which I think without the learning, I would not have scaled so quickly. So I think we do owe it to the people who are in the teaching, who are in the faculty, people like you who are giving back rather than just trying to build for-profit companies. And they are the one actually who are really the front lines of, people is how we need to empower you guys better to be able to make your job easier and make you even more effective and make sure you're getting paid and supported well. And I think that is the biggest equalizer which helped me get here, and that's the biggest equalizer which can get any other entrepreneur to be here. It's all the exposure and mentoring and coaching they get.
Did you get any pushback when, because you're doing a lot of M&A, you're bringing new cultures in, trying to create a unified approach. Did you get pushback from your team?
So I definitely get my pushback, and Carrie can probably say that as well, is that, hey, why do we need to grow fast? Why are we growing? Why can't we grow slow, right? And well, here's, I try to tell my team is that when we look at it, if you're investing your, $1,000 in a stock or a private company, if you get a return of, let's say, 5 or 7%, you're probably not going to take a chance at me. You'll probably just go put it in S&P or go buy a real estate. The only reason if I come to you and I want that $1,000, you're going to say, okay, and I tell you I can actually give you 20% return on it, you're going to take that risk to be able to do that. So I think if for us to raise the money, which helps us really grow and invest to solve the problems, what we're talking about for data and personalization and AI, these requires huge amount of investments. We need a lot of investments from public and private investors to make that happen. But if you're not able to give them the returns, then we are not going to be able to generate that kind of value. So, and I also feel like, I used to be part of big companies, and I used to say, by the time I'm going to release this stuff, my kid would have already been in college from elementary school.
Yeah.
So I think we have a sense of urgency. We owe it to this generation to make an impact to the coming generation rather than wait in 10, 15 years. And I tell this to my team all the time. If we don't achieve personalized learning in the next 3 years, probably there's not another company which has the resources, the engagement with the school districts to probably make this impact even in 10 years. So we actually have a responsibility to actually make this investment and grow faster to get there because school districts need help, and we are in a very unique position to be able to solve that problem.
So that's both a privilege and a burden, right?
It's a privilege and a burden, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have a couple minutes left, so if you have questions, please share them. I have a couple more here. So as you think about the notion of providing your technology globally, and the providing universal access, right? Regardless of where you are in the world, regardless of economic status, regardless of need for special education services or whatnot. Realistically, certain customers, certain districts, certain kinds of services are likely to be easier to provide and candidly probably more profitable. And yet to achieve the vision that you've talked about, you need to do all of them. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, this is, again, education is a hard problem to solve, and especially if you're trying to solve across this multifaceted capabilities that are required for districts to solve. Going back to the notion again, we can solve one area, but then if you're just solving area and we don't solve all the dependent, then you're back to the same problem. Your ROI of that investment is not good. We need to solve it in an integrated fashion. We need to solve with the data and giving the power of the data for school districts to make that. And that we're seeing it globally as well. In fact, I've been, as we're looking international, I've been traveling in Middle East, I've been traveling in India, traveling in Asia, even looking at the challenges. This is where, again, the education right now, especially after COVID, it's a big equalizer right now, that every country is struggling with the same things we are struggling here locally or in any other state. The problems right now are very universal and same. So this is really a strong movement where we can truly address this. I didn't used to think about that. 5 years back, somebody would have asked me, I would have said international is a much more longer cycle. But COVID just woke up all the other countries which were much behind in their maturity, because some of the countries had months and years of school closure. And they all have woken up, and even governments in Middle East, states in India are putting infrastructure to help address the education infrastructure that they don't have that kind of disruption again.
Thank you, Hardeep. So just a couple minutes left, so get your questions in. This is one that I know is near and dear to Andy's heart, although it doesn't have your professorial tone to it, or at least I won't be able to adequately, so I know it's not actually you. How do you balance the demands of driving innovation, right, which you've identified as critical to your success to solve these hard problems, with the need to maintain some level of stability and security, and in both security in the sense of we know what we're getting, but also security in the sense of we're protecting the data and the individuals? How do you balance that, the need for you're breaking a whole bunch of eggs to make these omelets, right, putting these companies together, driving innovation, yet school districts, governments need to know it's going to work, it's going to be stable, it's going to be secure?
Two things so I had a fortunate to come from a technology side, but then quickly realized sometimes when I was building technology, it was not getting used properly. So I shifted with my management to go on the product side, on product management, to understand, okay, I just don't want to build technology, I want to build the right technology which is addressing the right needs for the customer. And I was running product lifecycle management solutions for Oracle, where I was pretty much working with every major high-tech company and life sciences company, and even Coca-Cola on designing products and how to manage product life cycles. And one thing I've seen in organizations, a lot of organizations will put a lot of emphasis on sales and marketing, and you look at the public companies, they're spending almost 40% on sales and marketing to get, to make sure that they can bring more business in, but they're only spending 10 or 12% on R&D. In my perspective, I think those are short-term businesses. The ROI of product, if you build a good product that serves the need, then that has the biggest ROI for a company. Now, it's also even bigger than ROI of the product is the people. The people you're investing who are going to build that product have the biggest ROI, right? So, but it's the people, it's the product, and then the rest of the stuff. So my investments are focused with that same priority. I think we've been fortunate. There's a lot of companies you hear right now who are laying off people and didn't give salary increases or bonuses. I think, thankfully, we are still one of the lucky ones where we're investing in people, making sure our employees are getting taken care of, and they're dealing with the same inflation issues everybody else is. So we're trying to do the right by our employees. That helps us build a culture that allows us to innovate. The second part to your point, while I'm a big technologist and innovator, I associate myself with that. I just did a Myers-Briggs exercise for my team offsite tomorrow.
All right, go ahead. No, you can't open that box and not address it.
I would not open that.
No, what is it? What are your four letters?
I will hold that, actually. I have not got the assessment. We're going to get that tomorrow with the whole team.
Anybody want to guess?
Yeah. So what I did, I'll tell an incident back in 2017. We launched our first version of Unified Classroom. We wanted to have teachers one place we come in. But when we launched it, I got amount of hate mail from teachers because we, literally had a teacher who said that you added 30 minutes to my day. And what happened was our team, for right reason, did all user testing, everything, and they had built an iPad way to grade kids quickly. So you'll be able to see it on iPad so they changed the font and everything. So now it's a touch screen friendly and everything. Well, they screwed up the desktop interface in that process that now a teacher had to scroll down. So a teacher was picking a paper and recording the grade, now had to scroll down. First, they could fit 30 kids on that same screen because they had the fonts. Now they had to scroll down. So that added about 15, 30 minutes to their day to grade the 100 kids.
Sure, yeah.
And that's 30 minutes away from their families and everything, right? So that was a come to Jesus meeting with my team, is that we got to slow down to speed up. And, thanks to, again, my MBA professors, that was one of the first, book, one of my management professor shared with me and I picked that book and make sure everybody understands that you got to put the right infrastructure in place before we can innovate. We need more thorough testing. We need more studies, scientific studies on click-throughs and everything before we launch any innovation. Address the core infrastructure before we are launching the innovation. So what we do is typically any acquisitions we do, we almost bring it to the hangar for the first year, 2 years, to make sure we automate every test cases and change the cloud to AWS or Microsoft and get all that infrastructure that it's the most robust product, and now let's innovate faster on it. So it's, that has served us very well. We still can do better, but definitely our innovation has been much more received well thanks to all those investments.
Great, and thank you for that example. That's really powerful. Okay, so we have time for just a couple more questions. You mentioned teachers, so we have a couple of questions here in the stream and you mentioned it in your talk about the importance of this huge shortage of teachers in the state, nationally, globally, the challenge of teachers burning out, not just from the pandemic, but all the challenges of being in the classroom. And technology certainly can be an aid, but it can also, as you pointed out, be a stressor, particularly if you maybe been teaching for a while and this technology is new, and how much is your district going to invest in training you? So what can PowerSchool do? What can we do more broadly to make teaching more attractive? This is a simple question. You'll be able to nail this. Make teaching more attractive, recruit the 6 million new teachers we need, create an environment for them where they feel supported and able to successfully do their jobs. Pick any one of those, Hardeep.
Now, I always say this, I owe everything what I've been here to, thanks to my teachers and parents who invested.
I feel the same way.
And I think they are the front line of education. We got to empower them. We got to give them the tools. We got to support them every through the way. That's the only way successful. There are companies who are talking about online learning only and virtual learning, that you don't need colleges, you don't need schools, you can do everything online. We are not talking about that. We, in fact, our entire software, everything what we're doing, all the way from AI and personalization, is meant to augment the teacher and support the teacher, to help make the teacher more effective so they can spend more time on teaching. And that's empowerment all the way from tools to instructional side, to communication with parents and students, to insights, but then also their own development, their own well-being, their own social emotional. We talk a lot about right now social emotional aspects for student, and every district is invested in supporting social emotional, because that's actually, we're finding out that a lot of the academic issues are translating from a social emotional stuff. I had a superintendent who talked about that, kids are they're finding kids are more aggressive in the stuff because they're not social for a couple of years, and now they're back and they're seeing more fights happening. And so we're spending, but I think we're not investing for the teachers. Teachers went through the same thing. What kind of social emotional aspects investments districts are doing to support the teachers. So we're investing in coaching and more support for teachers through our technology, and partnering with UC Davis School of Education and some others to create more digital learning support and curriculums that can help us drive that support for the teachers.
Thank you for that, Hardeep. Okay, so I'm going to end with several questions from, I'm guessing, our students who, candidly, I'm fairly confident are looking at you and going, you have the dream gig, because you're able to tackle a really difficult problem, driving for social good, building a profitable, successful company, and being financially successful yourself. So what's the magic formula? How do you get there?
I do agree I have a dream gig. I say that I don't think I'll probably, do anything in my life more than the impact I'll be able to make through the job I have. So because the indirect impact to education, I think, has multiple factors. So definitely feel blessed. I think, as I said, I think it's the being at the right time at the right place. But other thing I would just add to that would be is taking risk as well. I think a lot of time we get very comfortable. So I remember, I got married, and within 3 months of the marriage, I left my job to start a startup. So I told my wife, 3 months after the marriage, I'm leaving my job, I'm going to do a startup. And
how did that conversation go?
Well, she's sitting in the audience, so you can ask her later. She was supportive, and that's why I did the startup. And, I look back at that experience, probably gave me the launch pad to be able to see the perspective which I would have never been able to see in a job, right? So taking risks as that entrepreneurship is very important. I take that lesson all the way into every element I do. I was sharing, I moved from Bay Area to Gainesville, Florida, to run a company. I was working at Oracle and went to this company in Gainesville, Florida, to go run that. Literally, we were called expat from California. And so...
Yeah, I bet you were. Yeah.
Yeah, so, so had we not taken that kind of a risk and, I would not have got the opportunity to become a CEO at there and being able to become a serial CEO, right? So it's at risk, and same thing in PowerSchool. A lot of time, I even had my investors say that you should slow down and don't acquire this area, we were actually had a pretty heated and candid discussion about the classroom technology solutions back in 98, 99. And I said, look, if we want to be in education, and if we are not addressing the classroom, then we're not making the biggest impact we can make in education. And guess what? COVID happened. We were able to, right there, add 5 million students to our classroom technology within 6 months to 1 year, because every school district was struggling and they needed better
And you
classroom
were ready.
So I think it's the risk where you actually had to put your neck on the line, and I literally had to put my neck on the line with investors to say that if I fail on this, you can have my job. So I think it's you have to be able to take that risk, and if you believe and you're passionate about something, you got to just follow through that.
Y'all hear that? Big round of applause, Hardeep. It is so
Thank you for the
grateful.
opportunity.
Thank you so much.